your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, thanks for joining us for a look back at Alberta this week. The Agri-Food Hub and Trade Centre in Lethbridge has barely opened their doors, and already they can barely afford to keep the lights on. The folks at the Lethbridge and District Exhibition approached the city for some emergency aid, a loan to help keep the doors open for the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Centre. The CEO of the X, Mike Workington, says rising interest rates have really impacted his organization, which is why they need help to cover a funding shortfall for his group. Council voted that if it receives provincial support by December 11th, it will provide a capital grant of just under $2.1 million. Around half of the funds to be given to the city by the province will help cover the capital shortfall. Workington says they expected to lose money for the first 4 years of operation, but if they don't get help, they could be in trouble by as early as this spring. He says, however, the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Centre is still very much needed for our region.
This facility changes the conversation about Lethbridge and Southern Alberta from a trade and tourism perspective as it relates to agribusiness. When we look at agribusiness as a sector in Canada, as a region of Southern Alberta, and its place in Canada, there is no comparison. And I think that's the opportunity that our organization believes so strongly in, which provides the opportunity for the trade and consumer business specific to that, and why our focus is that.
Well, if you're looking to adopt a puppy dog, the Lethbridge Animal Shelter has plenty of them, and soon there will be more space to interact with and play with the canines who are awaiting adoption. This week, Lethbridge City Council unanimously approved funding of up to $30,000 to build an enclosed 1,100 square meter dog run on the animal shelter property. Community Animal Services Director Skylar Plourde says an enclosed dog run will eliminate having to leash the dogs when going outside with them. He says it will also improve the shelter's ability to provide exercise for the dogs that are in their care.
It's going to provide very valuable enrichment activities for those dogs, which will in turn make them more adoptable. And that's what I think we're most excited about. And it comes at a good time where we are struggling in getting these dogs adopted. A lot of them do have behavioral issues that might be less attractive to potential families. And a lot of those behavioral issues come simply from a lack of exercise and stimulation in whatever environment they were in before they came to us. And it's hard to work through that with these dogs with the resources we had currently. And so this is a huge asset to us.
Well, construction crews in downtown Lethbridge have hit a milestone in wrapping up the construction season just in time for Christmas shopping. The intersection at 4th Avenue and 7th Street South was closed for several months to replace a 100-year-old water mains, replace pavement, and install protected cycling lanes. Urban Revitalization Manager for the city, Crystal Scheit, says the addition of bike lanes are necessary to help boost the downtown economy.
We've seen studies that have shown that having multimodal transportation into a downtown core really does bring in additional business. Being able to have the cycling lanes installed and connect into our existing cycling infrastructure and existing pathway networks is a huge bonus for the businesses, and I think it'll only encourage more tourism and people into the downtown in the summer months.
Senior Transportation Project Administrator for the city, Bryce Dudley, says the entire project is not quite completed, but it is looking to stay on budget.
The budget for this project is about $4 million. 1.2 million of that is funded through the Active Transportation Fund, which is a federal fund. The rest comes from operating budgets. The project isn't over, but we're projecting to be under budget currently.
Well, it appears as though copper wire theft is on the rise. RCMP and Pincher Creek have been investigating a number of incidents dealing with copper theft from critical infrastructure sites in southwest Alberta. Police say the thefts have resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages and have impacted local water supplies. They say one landowner in Pincher Creek spotted two people stripping wire from a wind turbine near the town. Police were called and arrested two individuals, 46-year-old Johannes Jorgensen of Lundbrick and 57-year-old Daniel Price of Pincher Creek who face various charges. They include break and enter, theft over $5,000, and charges under the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act. They will be appearing in provincial court in Pincher Creek on Thursday. After the break, it was a big week for Alberta as the Premier announced her government's plan to invoke the Sovereignty Act. We will be right back. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith announced her plans to invoke the government's Sovereignty Act on Monday over federal clean energy regulations. Smith spoke to reporters in advance of a motion that was tabled in the legislature later that day. Smith says she wants to introduce the Sovereignty Act to protect Alberta from the federal government's proposed 2035 net zero electricity grid regulations and instead have its own timeline of 2050.
The Constitution is clear. Electricity is a provincial responsibility. The federal government would do well to remember that. They have already lost 2 recent court battles in which their overreach into provincial jurisdiction was struck down by the courts. Ottawa's approach is also at odds with reality. Although Alberta leads the country in renewable investment, we still cannot use it for the majority of our electricity needs. For Albertans to have electricity they can count on, our province needs more baseload power from natural gas.
The Act, which allows the province to reject federal laws or regulations when it thinks harm is caused to Alberta, was passed by the UCP government last year. Meanwhile, Alberta's opposition NDP leader Rachel Notley issued a statement in response saying, quote, "The UCP is invoking a dishonest and illegal stunt that jeopardizes investment certainty, breaches treaty rights across the country, weakens national unity, and embarrasses Albertans on the global stage. Energy experts, investors, and forward-looking Albertans all believe we can and should achieve net zero much sooner than 2050, which would attract billions in investment and create thousands of jobs." Notley goes on to say this is a distraction from Albertans' priorities. It's incompetent and backward and does nothing to secure Alberta's economic future, end quote. So how will the Sovereignty Act actually work in this case? And could the federal government turn around and sue the province over it? Well, Alberta's Affordability and Utilities Minister Nathan Neudorf explains.
The free market generators in Alberta would be faced with either huge costs and passing that on to the ratepayer or just walking away. That's why we had to bring forward the Sovereignty Act to protect them, to say, no, we need you to generate electricity for the safety of our community, for the cost that our ratepayers have to pay. We must, as the government of Alberta, protect our constituents. And the federal government needs to know our resolve to be able to do this so that when we continue to sit down with them and talk things through, they actually take us seriously and listen to what we're saying instead of just endless platitudes and patting us on the head. The Minister, Stephen Guilbeault, said today that they have no desire to pursue a legal path. They've said different things like that before. And that would be great. That would save all of us a lot of time and money, particularly the taxpayer. But it's better to put the ball in the federal government's court to realize that if they want things to change, they either have to negotiate with us or they have to take us to court, than us constantly having to chase them around to court all the way to the Supreme Court in Canada.
On a separate topic, in a press conference held later in the week, opposition leader Rachel Notley said she has reviewed the province's legislation for Bill 2, which is the Alberta Pension Protection Act. She says after doing so, she was shocked to learn the bill does none of the things the United Conservative Party is claiming that it does.
If Bill 2 passes in its current form, the UCP could hold a referendum, lose it badly, and still happily proceed on ahead with an Alberta pension plan. And it would not contravene this proposed legislation. The bill also fails to stop the provincial government from giving that all-important notice to the federal government that they want to leave the CPP before a referendum is held.
The Alberta's NDP is also demanding accountability from the province for oil sand leaks in northern Alberta. Jody Kellehu Stonehouse, who is the Alberta NDP critic for environment, parks, and climate resilience, says several incidents have occurred over the past 18 months at the Curl site.
During some of these incidents, laws were broken, consultation with First Nations did not occur, and repeated attempts were made to downplay the severity of what has happened. Look at the leak from the Kearl Oil Sands facility on November 13th, the third from that exact facility this year. A total of 670,000 litres were released into the river. That, in the sediment, it was 4 times the legal limit.
Calahoo Stonehouse says that in none of the incidents did MLAs contact the people about the leaks or keep them updated, including Minister of Energy and Minerals Brian Jean, who in a November 15th post on X said he toured the Kearl Oil Sands site and described the company's commitment to environmental protection as, quote, top-notch. After the break, we tell you how nurse practitioners are helping tackle that doctor shortage in the province. Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, it's no secret there have been big problems with Alberta's healthcare system, particularly with a lack of doctors and talk of privatization. The province has now launched a survey about its healthcare and is looking to expand opportunities for nurse practitioners instead of doctors to help with that growing need. Up next, BCN's Hal Roberts gets the lowdown from the legislative correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson.
Now, the province has also launched another survey, but this one has nothing to do with the potential Alberta pension plan. This one is about the potential of reorganizing our healthcare system. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, you know, the government, this government, I mean, Kenny's government too, I mean, they loved their public consultations and their public surveys. So the government announced this AHS reform a couple weeks ago, and it's frankly really confusing. I mean, I don't know if anyone has fully sort of wrapped their head around it about what it'll actually mean, but the basic version of it is it's going to break AHS into sort of 4 different streams, and each will be responsible for different parts of the care system, whether that's primary care, hospitals, long-term care, mental health, and addictions are sort of the 4 pillars here. So it's not super clear, I would say, what that's going to look like on the ground for people attempting to access services, but there is this survey where people can give feedback on what they think of this proposal to sort of rejig the setup. And, you know, it's going to be interesting because the Alberta Pension Plan survey got quite a bit of flack. You know, it asked some of these logistical questions, but never asked, for example, whether people thought an Alberta pension plan was a good idea. So I would expect we are going to hear a little bit of sort of public grumbling about what this survey looks like, what it's asking. And it'll be interesting to see what the responses are because, of course, this is very complicated. And I think people are understandably leery of any changes to the healthcare system if they feel like they might lose services or lose their doctor or something. So remains to be seen what will come of it, you know, to what extent that's incorporated into this overhaul and all that fun stuff too.
Now, still with healthcare, Tyler, the UCP is looking into increasing the role of nurse practitioners to help really strengthen our healthcare system. What would the reforms potentially look like, and how would they be really beneficial for Albertans?
Well, the basic idea is that nurse practitioners are going to be able to open their own clinics and practice independently. So, you know, instead potentially of having a GP as your family doctor, you might have a nurse practitioner as your sort of first point of contact with the healthcare system. This is the case already in a lot of other jurisdictions, particularly the United States, but there are other provinces that have sort of expanded roles for NPs as well. And so that's the basic premise of how it's going to improve things. You know, if there's a doctor shortage, if there's tons of Albertans who can't get a family doctor, well, maybe these nurses who have, you know, sort of graduate level education, the government says they can do about 80% of what a family doctor can do. You know, maybe you'll get one of those and that'll be sort of good enough as a first point of contact. It is likely to be a little bit controversial, I think. It is controversial in other jurisdictions. Nurse practitioners do have a little bit less training than doctors. They don't have sort of the full suite of training and skills that doctors do. So I would expect to hear a little bit about that. But, you know, I think for people who are struggling to find a first point of contact with the medical system and are instead going to walk-in clinics or emergency when something happens, I think a lot of people are going to quite like this.
You know, Tyler, many people would agree that Alberta right now is a two-party province. You got the UCP and the NDP. kind of like down in the States with the Republicans and the Democratic Party. Now, as we saw in the last provincial election, none of the other parties, including the Alberta Party or the Liberals, made much of a dent. Now, Barry Morishita, the former Brooks mayor, stepped down as leader of the centrist Alberta Party. He says there really is a need for his party, but you know what? Not a lot of money to support it.
Yeah, centrist parties, I think, really struggle. I mean, it's really hard to get fired up about moderate ideas. It's sort of like being a really enthusiastic member of the United Church. It's a tough sell, I think, for some people. My parents were United Church people, so no disrespect intended towards the United Church folks out there. But centrist parties everywhere really struggle to get a whole lot of enthusiasm for their ideas. But the people who are involved are obviously very, very committed, and they believe that there's sort of a middle path to progress. But Barry Morishita did say, look, this needs money, this needs volunteers, and whether or not that's going to be forthcoming is really tough to say. If you look at the sort of numbers from the election in May, a lot of the ground that the NDP made up in terms of vote count probably came from former Alberta Party voters. So a lot of the sort of centrist voters have now just sort of coalesced around the New Democrats, which has really sort of gutted the Alberta Party's sort of historic voter base, I think. So it's going to be tough to rebuild that, I think, and whoever takes that on is going to have a tough path. The Alberta Liberals, for example, they struggle to even find a leader.
After the break, the rift between Ottawa and Alberta. What's the story behind this historic animosity? What is the backstory on the division, or maybe even the animosity between Alberta and Ottawa? Well, David Leese, host of Return to Reason's Leaders on the Frontier, sat down with Dennis Maudry, founder of the Alberta Prosperity Project, to discover the historical roots of that tension. Take a look.
If we look at the history of the founding of this country, if we think of the British North America Act, we know that in 1867, a family of British colonies in the northern part of our continent got together through the genius of so many others, including Sir John A. Macdonald, and said, wow, we could work together as a particular type of federation. And they worked together as co-founders with the provinces equal to each other, working together to create a federal government that they thought they could serve themselves better and create a new country, Canada. So would you say it's important to remember that history, and how does that inform your vision about how we need to go about our business today?
That is important, and I think the original concept of a federation with provinces having the autonomy to develop to the extent that they wish to develop and to have their self-determination was the right concept. Mm-hmm. But it didn't work that way, and it didn't work that way by design. And this is what's important to understand. I'm going to show you hold up a book. Can you see this?
I sure can.
This is a book about Clifford Sifton. Now, why is it relevant? Because Clifford Sifton was the Minister of the Interior in the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who was responsible for bringing Alberta and Saskatchewan into Confederation in September 1, 1905. But it's what he said in a speech in Winnipeg in 1904, which is referenced on page 95 of this book. The entire statement that he said is important to understand, because when you understand it, you'll understand why Alberta has been treated the way it has been treated, and why we started as a colony and we continue to be a colony to serve the interests of the East. And it's over time to fix that. But here's what
Alberta, you'd say that Alberta is like a colony of the rest of the country?
Has been treated as a colony of the East. And I'll tell you why. Well, I already gave you a clue. We've given $700 billion since 1965.
Yeah,
we're overtaxed. Like I said, we get taxed at $60 billion a year. We get back 27. So here's the point. This is what Clifford Sifton said in 1904. And when you understand how prescient this this comment is that he made, you'll understand why Alberta is in the dilemma that it is right now. So what he said in 1904 was this: we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire. Now, Canadian patriots in 1904 are the people that are living in the regions of Ontario and Quebec, because Alberta and Saskatchewan were not hadn't joined Canada yet. So we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies is Alberta's wealth, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to our prosperity, not the prosperity of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Now, that's important to understand, because that is the pervading perspective that the Laurentian elites still have about Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Wow.
Now, it's important to understand one other point, and that's the national energy policy. And the national energy policy was instituted in 1980. But prior to that, Alberta was becoming the center of economic power in Canada. Massive immigration was occurring from elsewhere in Canada to Alberta, and from elsewhere in the world to Alberta. All 5 major banks were moving their head offices to Calgary, and one did. But what was happening in Alberta at that time was, and by the way, that was occurring because of our hydrocarbon industry, basically liquid gold, if you will. But what was happening in Alberta collided with what was happening in Quebec with the Quebec secessionist movement. So Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Marc Lalonde and the financial elites from Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal came up with a brilliant plan. That was the national energy policy.
Up next, we finally see some action on a 50-year discussion to twin Alberta's Crow's Nest Highway. But first, a quick break. Highway 3 in southern Alberta, dubbed the Crow's Nest Highway, is part of the National Highway Systems of Canada, and anyone who's traveled it would have noticed only portions of it are divided. Plans for twinning Highway 3 have been discussed for nearly 50 years, and now it looks like the ball will finally get rolling in the new year with Phase 1 between Taber and Burdett, Alberta. Earlier this week, I was joined by Coaldale Town Councillor Bill Chapman, who is also the president of the Highway 3 Twinning Development Association. He believes there are not only safety benefits to twinning the highway, but also tourism, recreational, and economic benefits. Take a look.
Yes, and as a growing province, we do know that every one of our communities is growing. So the impact of having this highway certainly will be the centerpiece to all of the economic activities that will occur and all the economic growth that is going to take place over the next 10 years. And of course, with the agri-food corridor growing, we're going to see a number of mega projects coming up over the next number of years that really will impact all sorts of service levels in Alberta. And of course, Highway 3 will become the cornerstone to all of these needs in southern Alberta.
Are you getting any pushback from businesses on who might, businesses that might possibly miss out on potential drive-through business?
I don't think so. I would like to speak for the town of Coaldale, and of course, back in the 50s, the Ministry of Transportation talked about routing highways or major highways around municipalities, mainly for economic and safety reasons, safety and efficiency reasons.
Yeah, 100%.
So that was important to note, because Coaldale went through those conversations back in the 50s and again in the 1970s when they actually went to work to twin the highway around Coaldale. And if you remember, the old Highway 3 did go right through downtown Coaldale. And so if you were going to look at today's traffic, not only in numbers, but also in regards to the type of traffic that's occurring on Highway 3, downtown Coaldale would not be able to accommodate the amount and the size of traffic that's going through our community today. So if you look at history and then go to what we've encountered today, that the town of Coaldale has already been bypassed once. That being said, our community has grown 4 times that number since the 1970s. We're a community of over 9,000 population today. So if we translate that theory to other municipalities across our corridor, I don't doubt that there'll be any concerns about bypassing. I know that chambers of commerce are on side with Highway 3 twinning. They believe that this will be a major source of economic boost to the community.
So we know phase 1 is beginning in 2024. It'll take 3 years. How many phases are there in total, and how long will the whole project take? And when will the next phase begin, phase 2?
Yes, so there's a total of 8 phases, and so the government is proudly proclaiming a 10-year window for completing these phases. Some of that will be doable, and of course we know that some of the engineering can take place simultaneously. So some of these phases can go in sequence, or not just an A, B, C, D, and E order. We can certainly see some engineering, some stuff happening simultaneously.
And then, Bill, just before we go here, are there any final thoughts on this the Highway 3 twinning project?
Absolutely. We want to ensure that our association is still on board with ensuring that several components to the project be done and done right. Number 1 would being, of course, rest stops. Number 2 being animal crossings. And number 3 is really what we want to ensure is that there are an adequate number of entrances into our communities where the highway might be bypassed. So those are serious considerations and concerns from the municipalities that have been concerned about bypassing the community.
After the break, we delve into the economic outlook for southern Alberta, especially with Christmas just around the corner.